Of all the golden statuettes handed out on Oscar night, perhaps none are more coveted than the one for Best Actor. It's a symbol of ultimate achievement, a validation of a lifetime dedicated to the craft. But what if that lifetime wasn't spent chasing applause or seeing your name in lights? What if, for nearly half a century, your job was to be invisible, to be the anonymous figure falling off a horse, taking a punch, or crashing a chariot, all for someone else's glory? And what if, at the very end of your life, when the spotlight you never sought finally found you, it illuminated a private pain so profound that even Hollywood's highest honor couldn't ease it? This is the story of a man who lived his life in the background, a true cowboy who only became a movie star in the twilight of his years. It's the story of Richard Farnsworth, the actor who, just months after being nominated for an Academy Award, made the devastating choice to end his own life, unable to bear the agony of a terminal illness. His journey from the dusty backlots of Hollywood to the glittering stage of the Oscars is one of the most unlikely and heartbreaking tales the Dream Factory has ever produced. It's a story about quiet dignity, hidden suffering, and the true meaning of courage in the face of an enemy you can't defeat. Richard Farnsworth's story belongs to an old, rugged Hollywood, where persistence and hard work shaped a person more than glitz and fame. He was born on September 1st, 1920 in Los Angeles, California, into an ordinary family far removed from the world of acting. His father was an engineer, and his mother managed the household. Life changed drastically when his father died in 1927, leaving 7-year-old Richard to be raised by his mother alongside his 2 sisters in downtown Los Angeles. His aunt moved in to help support the family. The Great Depression hit in 1929 when Richard was 9, bringing financial hardship to many, including his family. Jobs were scarce and money was tight. Little is known about his education, but like many children of that era, he likely faced pressure to work early to help make ends meet. The Los Angeles of his childhood wasn't the glamorous city of movie stars. It was a landscape of orange groves, dusty roads, and hard-working people scraping by. The city in the 1920s and 1930s blended urban growth with rural patches, with farms and ranches dotting the outskirts. Richard was a quiet, unassuming boy who learned the importance of hard work young. Growing up in an area where horses and ranching were common, he developed a strong interest in riding by his early teens. This passion, born from necessity and his surroundings, set the stage for his future. At the age of 16, Richard Farnsworth faced hard choices during the Great Depression. With his family struggling financially, he dropped out of high school to find work that could bring in steady money. He started as a stable hand at a ranch near Hollywood that supplied horses to movie studios. His daily tasks were basic and demanding: cleaning stalls filled with manure, feeding and grooming the horses, and ensuring they were fit for long shooting days. The pay was low, around a few dollars a week, and the hours were long, but it gave him hands-on experience with horses, building on skills he had picked up from childhood rides on family farms. This routine changed in 1938 when a production team for the film The Adventures of Marco Polo needed extra riders to portray Mongolian horsemen. The ranch hands, including Farnsworth, were offered the job on the spot. At $7 per day, it was far more than his stable wage, enough to make a real difference for his family. He accepted without hesitation, marking his entry into stunt work. What seemed like a simple riding gig quickly revealed the harsh reality of the profession in the 1930s. Stuntmen had no formal training or safety nets. They learned on the job, often through painful mistakes. Falls from horses could break bones or cause concussions, and scenes involving chases or battles meant real collisions with no padding or wires. Medical care was minimal, and many performers ended up with lifelong injuries or worse. Deaths were not uncommon in westerns and epics. Farnsworth stood out due to his natural talent for handling horses under pressure. He could control them at full gallop, perform precise maneuvers, and stay calm during chaotic shoots. His professional attitude, no complaints, always reliable, earned him repeat calls from directors. Unlike actors who got credit and fame, stuntmen like him remained anonymous, their names absent from credits until decades later. By the early 1940s, he had become a top specialist in horse-related stunts, doubling for stars in risky sequences while staying out of the spotlight. This foundation of grit and skill supported his 4-decade career, where he prioritized safety for the animals and precision in every take, even as the dangers persisted. This wasn't just a job, it was a way of life. The stuntmen of that era formed a tight-knit community. They were cowboys, athletes, and gamblers, risking their lives for a paycheck and the thrill of the ride. Farnsworth, known as Dick to his friends, was respected for his professionalism and his quiet confidence. He wasn't a showman, he was a craftsman. He understood horses better than most people understood themselves. This deep, intuitive connection allowed him to perform stunts that others wouldn't dare. He could make a horse fall on cue, rear up in a dramatic silhouette, or gallop through a chaotic battle scene with uncanny precision. But it was a punishing career. Farnsworth broke his back, his neck, his arms, and countless ribs over the years. Each injury was a reminder of the fragility of his profession and his own mortality. Yet he kept going, driven by a sense of duty and a love for the work. He was a product of the Depression, and the idea of steady work, no matter how dangerous, was something to be cherished. He married, had 2 children, and lived a modest life, far from the Hollywood spotlight. He was a family man who just happened to have one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. This was his world for over 40 years, a world of calculated risks, broken bones, and complete anonymity. He never sought fame, never took an acting class, and never dreamed of seeing his own name in the credits. He was a stuntman, and for him that was more than enough. But fate, it seemed, had a different script in mind for his final act. For 40 years, Richard Farnsworth's world was one of controlled chaos. He was a master of the unseen art, a ghost in the Hollywood machine. His career was a highlight reel of cinematic danger, yet his face remained a mystery to the millions who watched his work. He was one of the Thracian slaves, driving chariots in Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus, a film notorious for its grueling production and dangerous stunts. Farnsworth, an uncredited stunt performer, was right there in the heart of the action, his skill with horses making him indispensable. He was there when Kirk Douglas led the slave revolt, a moment of epic filmmaking that relied entirely on the courage of men like Farnsworth. He worked for the legendary director Cecil B. DeMille in The 10 Commandments, another monumental production where stunt performers were pushed to their limits. Think of almost any classic Western from the 40s, 50s, or 60s, and there's a good chance Richard Farnsworth was there, falling off a horse, taking a tumble, or riding furiously across the plains. He doubled for the biggest stars of the day, including Roy Rogers, the king of the cowboys, and the brooding, intense Montgomery Clift. He even stood in for Henry Fonda, an actor known for his quiet gravitas, a quality Farnsworth himself possessed in spades. His life was a catalog of near misses and broken bones. The physical toll was immense. Over the decades, he accumulated a litany of injuries that would have ended the careers of lesser men. He fractured his neck, shattered his shoulder, and broke numerous bones. Each injury was a harsh reminder of the risks he took daily. Yet, he had a family to support, his wife Margaret, and their 2 children, Diamond and Missy. The steady, if perilous, work of a stuntman provided for them. They lived a life far removed from the glitz of Hollywood, on a ranch where Farnsworth could be himself, surrounded by the horses he loved. His peers in the stunt community revered him. He was known for his stoicism and his incredible work ethic. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He was the consummate professional, always prepared, always reliable. This quiet dignity and deep-seated competence would unexpectedly pave the way for a second career he never imagined. The transition began subtly. As he got older, the high-impact stunts became more difficult. His body, battered from decades of abuse, could no longer cash the checks his courage wrote. But directors and producers who had known him for years started to notice something more than just his skill as a horseman. They saw a face etched with the lines of a life lived outdoors, eyes that held a quiet wisdom and a natural, unforced presence that the camera loved. In 1975, he had a small, uncredited part in The Duchess and the Dirtwater Fox, starring Goldie Hawn and George Segal. It was little more than a bit part, but it was a start. Then came a role with a few lines in the 1976 film The Outlaw Josie Wales, directed by and starring Clint Eastwood. The real turning point, however, arrived in 1978 with the Alan J. Pakula film Comes a Horseman. The film starred Jane Fonda and James Caan, and Farnsworth was cast in the supporting role of Dodger, an old weathered ranch hand. It was a role he was born to play. He wasn't acting, he was simply being. He brought a lifetime of experience as a real cowboy to the screen. His performance was so authentic, so effortlessly genuine, that it caught everyone by surprise. The quiet stuntman, the man who had spent his life making others look good, was suddenly a standout. The performance earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. It was a stunning development. At 58 years old, after 4 decades of anonymity, Richard Farnsworth was an Oscar nominee. He was genuinely baffled by the attention. He told reporters at the time, "I've been in a lot of pictures, but I never had a line before. I'm just a stuntman. I don't know why this is happening to me." He didn't win the Oscar that night, but it didn't matter. A door had opened to a new world. His newfound fame led to his first ever leading role in the 1982 Canadian film, The Grey Fox. He played Bill Miner, a real-life stagecoach robber who, after being released from prison in the early 20th century, finds the world has changed and struggles to adapt, eventually becoming a train robber. The film was a critical darling, and Farnsworth's performance was hailed as a masterpiece of understated acting. He perfectly captured Miner's quiet charm, his melancholy, and his gentle, almost apologetic approach to a life of crime. The role earned him a Golden Globe nomination and cemented his status as a legitimate, if unlikely, leading man. One of the most revealing untold stories from this period comes from the set of The Grey Fox. The director, Philip Borsos, was a young, ambitious filmmaker. He was initially hesitant to cast the inexperienced Farnsworth in the lead. During one scene, Borsos was trying to get a specific emotional reaction from Farnsworth. He kept pushing, asking for more, for something different. Farnsworth listened patiently and then, in his typically quiet way, said, "Son, I've been a stuntman for 40 years. I've been hit, I've been thrown, I've been run over. I only know how to do things for real. You just tell me what you want me to feel and I'll feel it." It was a moment that perfectly encapsulated his approach to acting. There was no artifice, no method. There was only honesty. He wasn't pretending to be Bill Miner. He was finding the Bill Miner within himself. For the next decade, he worked steadily, appearing in films like The Natural alongside Robert Redford and the screen adaptation of Stephen King's Misery. He brought a quiet dignity and a sense of lived history to every role he played. He was Hollywood's grandfather, a comforting presence who seemed to belong to a different, more honorable time. He had finally found his voice, and the world was listening. But as his star ascended, a private battle was just beginning, one that would test his famous stoicism to its very limits. Richard Farnsworth's late-life stardom was built on a foundation of authenticity. He wasn't playing cowboys and ranchers, he was a cowboy and a rancher. This deep well of personal experience is what made his performances so compelling and emotionally resonant. His private life was a reflection of the characters he played on screen, quiet, principled, and deeply connected to the land. After his first brush with fame, he and his wife Margaret continued to live a modest life, first in California and later on a 60-acre ranch in Lincoln, New Mexico. This wasn't a celebrity estate. It was a working ranch, a place where Farnsworth could escape the artificiality of Hollywood and reconnect with the things that mattered most to him. He was a man who was more comfortable in a saddle than on a red carpet. An anecdote that perfectly captures his character comes from his daughter, Missy. She recalled that after he was nominated for his first Oscar for Comes a Horseman, reporters and photographers descended on their home. Farnsworth, ever the pragmatist, was more concerned about them spooking the horses than he was about the interviews. He would politely answer their questions, while simultaneously keeping a watchful eye on his animals, his priorities firmly in place. His marriage to Margaret was the anchor of his life. They were married for 38 years, until her death from cancer in 1985. Her loss was a devastating blow. Farnsworth, a man not given to public displays of emotion, retreated even further into his private world. He poured his energy into his work and his ranch, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of country life. His friends and family described him as a man of profound integrity, but also one who kept his own counsel. He was intensely private, especially when it came to his own pain. He had spent a lifetime as a stuntman, an occupation where complaining about injuries was seen as a sign of weakness. You got hurt, you patched yourself up, and you got back on the horse. This stoic, almost stubborn self-reliance would define his approach to the final and most difficult challenge of his life. In the early 1990s, Farnsworth began to experience a persistent gnawing pain in his bones. He was eventually diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer that had spread to his skeletal system. It was a brutal, relentless disease, one that causes excruciating, deep-seated pain. True to form, he kept the diagnosis largely to himself. He continued to work, appearing in films and television, rarely letting on the extent of his suffering. To the outside world, he was the same gentle, weathered figure they had come to admire. Internally, he was fighting a daily battle against an agony that was steadily worsening. This period of his life is where the emotional core of his story lies. He was a man famous for his physical toughness, now being undone from the inside out. He had faced down charging horses and crash-speeding chariots, but this was an enemy he couldn't outwit or overpower. It was in this state of private torment that he was approached by director David Lynch for a film called The Straight Story. The script, based on a true event, told the story of Alvin Straight, an elderly Iowa man who, upon learning his estranged brother has had a stroke, decides to visit him. Too poor to afford a bus ticket and with eyesight too poor to drive a car, Alvin embarks on a 240-mile journey from Iowa to Wisconsin on a John Deere riding lawnmower. Lynch, known for his surreal and often disturbing films, saw Farnsworth as the only actor who could play Alvin. He sent him the script, but Farnsworth, by this point partially paralyzed and in constant pain from his cancer, initially turned it down. He told Lynch, "I don't think I can do it. I'm not well." But Lynch persisted. He flew to New Mexico to meet with Farnsworth at his ranch. They sat and talked not as director and actor, but as two men. Lynch was struck by Farnsworth's dignity and his profound connection to the character of Alvin Straight. He saw that Farnsworth's own physical struggles mirrored Alvin's journey. This wasn't just a role, it was a reflection of his reality. A rarely told story from this meeting reveals the depth of Farnsworth's condition. During their conversation, Farnsworth had to excuse himself several times to manage his pain. Yet he never complained. Lynch later recalled, "You could see he was in pain, but he had this incredible grace about him." Farnsworth eventually agreed to do the film, with one condition. He wanted to be truthful to Alvin's story and his own. The production was tailored to accommodate his health. The shooting schedule was arranged to give him ample rest. The scenes were often shot in chronological order, allowing Farnsworth to live Alvin's journey as it unfolded. The emotional impact of this on-set was profound. The cast and crew, including his co-star Sissy Spacek, who played his daughter, were in awe of his courage. Spacek said he was in terrible pain, but he was a cowboy. He was so stoic, he never complained. She remembered moments between takes when he would just close his eyes, enduring a wave of agony, only to open them and deliver a perfect, heartbreaking performance when the cameras rolled. He was channeling his own suffering into the character. When Alvin Straight weeps, remembering the horrors of World War II, or when he speaks with quiet regret about the pride that kept him from his brother, it's impossible to separate the character from the actor. Farnsworth was laying his own soul bare. The performance was a testament to his strength, a final defiant act of will in the face of unbearable pain. The film became his masterpiece, a perfect and poignant swan song. The story of Richard Farnsworth is, for the most part, one of quiet professionalism and universally acknowledged integrity. In an industry often rife with scandal and controversy, his name remained remarkably untarnished. He was, by all accounts, a gentleman of the old school. However, his final act, the decision to take his own life, inevitably places him at the center of a difficult and deeply personal debate, one that touches on issues of autonomy, suffering, and the right to die with dignity. It's a controversy not of his making, but one that his tragic end forces us to confront. To be clear, Farnsworth himself was not a controversial figure. There were no public feuds, no political scandals, no whispers of misconduct. The debate surrounding him is a posthumous one, stemming directly from the circumstances of his death. After the release of the Straight story in 1999, the critical acclaim was universal and overwhelming. Farnsworth's performance was lauded as the crowning achievement of his career. He became the oldest person ever to be nominated for a Best Actor Oscar at the age of 79. The nomination was a bittersweet triumph. On one hand, it was the ultimate recognition from his peers, a beautiful final chapter to an improbable Hollywood story. On the other, it cast a harsh spotlight on his rapidly deteriorating health. During the award season, he was often too ill to attend events or give interviews. His partner at the time, Julie Van Valen, would often speak on his behalf. Those who did see him noted his frailty and the visible pain he was in. He attended the Oscar ceremony in March 2000, but lost to Kevin Spacey for American Beauty. By this point, winning or losing was secondary. The journey itself had taken its toll. The months following the Oscars were a period of intense and escalating suffering. The cancer had left him partially paralyzed and in constant, excruciating pain. The man who had spent his life on horseback, the epitome of rugged independence, was now largely confined to his home, dependent on others for his care. For a person of such profound self-reliance, this loss of autonomy was as painful as the disease itself. On October 6th, 2000, at his ranch in Lincoln, New Mexico, Richard Farnsworth took a shotgun and ended his life. He was 80 years old. His fiancée, Julie, was present at the ranch at the time. The news sent a shockwave through Hollywood and beyond. It was a tragic and deeply unsettling end to a life that had, in its final years, brought so much inspiration to others. His death immediately sparked a conversation about end-of-life choices. In the year 2000, the Death with Dignity movement was still in its relative infancy and was a subject of heated ethical and religious debate. Farnsworth's suicide was not a political statement, but it was impossible to separate from this larger context. On one side, there were those who viewed his act as a tragedy, a surrender to despair, and a violation of the sanctity of life. This perspective often emphasizes the availability of palliative care and hospice, arguing that no one should feel that suicide is their only option to escape pain. From this viewpoint, his death was a cry for help that went unanswered, a sad failure of the support systems that should be in place for the terminally ill. On the other side of the debate are those who saw his choice as a final courageous act of self-determination. They argued that Farnsworth, a man who lived his life on his own terms, chose to die on his own terms as well. This perspective posits that for someone suffering from an incurable disease with no hope of recovery and only the prospect of increasing agony and loss of dignity, choosing the time and manner of one's death is a fundamental human right. Proponents of this view would say that Farnsworth didn't surrender to his illness. He defeated it. He refused to let it be the thing that had the final say. He took control of his own narrative, ending it with the same quiet resolve that had defined his entire life. David Lynch, the director who coaxed him into his final role, offered a nuanced and compassionate take. He spoke of Farnsworth's cowboy spirit, his stoicism, and his immense pride. He suggested that Farnsworth simply reached a point where the pain and the loss of his physical independence became an unbearable indignity. There is no easy answer or settled consensus in this debate. It remains one of the most complex and personal ethical questions of our time. Richard Farnsworth's story doesn't provide a solution, but it provides a powerful human face to the dilemma. He wasn't a statistic or a talking point in a political argument. He was a man of immense character and quiet strength, pushed to an unimaginable limit. His final choice, born of desperation and pain, forces us to look beyond simplistic judgments and to consider the profound complexities of a life lived and ended with a fierce, unwavering dignity. The story of Richard Farnsworth is more than just a Hollywood biography. It's a profound meditation on the nature of identity, endurance, and the quiet dignity of a life well lived. His long-term significance lies not just in his Oscar nominations or his beloved performances, but in the powerful and ultimately tragic narrative of his entire journey. He stands as a unique bridge between two fundamentally different eras of Hollywood: the anonymous, blue-collar world of the stuntman and the star-driven universe of the leading actor. His career is a testament to the idea that true artistry can be found in the most unexpected places. For decades, he was a craftsman, not an artist in the traditional sense. His canvas was the dusty ground of a movie set. His tools were his body and his incredible skill with horses. He sought no applause and received none. This first half of his professional life gives his later success its deep, resonant power. When we watch him in The Gray Fox or The Straight Story, we are not just seeing an actor playing a part. We are seeing the culmination of a lifetime of experience, hardship, and quiet observation. The lines on his face were not applied by a makeup artist. They were earned over decades of hard living and physical risk. This authenticity is his most enduring legacy as a performer. He reminds us that the most compelling stories are often told by those who have truly lived. For decades, Richard Farnsworth was a stuntman in Hollywood. He was known for his quiet integrity, not for being famous. When he finally began acting in front of the camera, he brought a rare authenticity. On screen, in roles from The Gray Fox to his final film, The Straight Story, he represented a kind of man whose strength came from his skill and dignity, not from his words. However, the end of his story is tragic. Suffering from the constant pain of terminal cancer, Farnsworth took his own life in 2000. His death started an important and necessary conversation about death with dignity. He gave a human face to this difficult choice, turning a strong screen hero into a symbol for the right to make one's own decisions at the end of life. Ultimately, the value of Farnsworth's life is not found in his Oscar nomination, but in the dignity he showed throughout his journey. For 40 years, he worked quietly with only his own integrity to guide him. The authentic strength he showed wasn't acting. It was the result of a life lived with honor. His final choice was not a surrender, but a decisive act to remain in control, showing the same independence he always had. He left behind more than just films. He left a lesson on what it means to face both life and death with quiet courage. Perhaps the most poignant part of his story is the cruel irony that his greatest professional triumph coincided with his deepest personal suffering. As Hollywood celebrated his talent, his body was betraying him in the most brutal way. The stoicism that had served him so well throughout his life, the cowboy code of enduring pain without complaint, became both his defining grace and his private prison. He gave us one last luminous performance in The Straight Story, channeling his own agony into a character that will stand the test of time. He showed us the beauty in aging, the nobility in reconciliation, and the stubborn strength of the human spirit. His final choice, though heartbreaking, was in many ways the last act of a man who refused to be a victim. He lived his life on his own terms, defined by a fierce independence. In the end, he chose to die the same way. We are left not with a story of despair, but with a complex and deeply human portrait of a man who faced the end with the same quiet dignity that he lived his life. Richard Farnsworth's journey from the dusty backlots to the dark finality of his New Mexico ranch is a powerful, sorrowful, and unforgettable American story. He was the real thing in a town built on make-believe, and his legacy is a quiet reminder that the most profound stories are often the ones lived far from the spotlight. Ultimately, Richard Farnsworth matters because his life was a study in contrast that speaks to the core of the human experience. He was the anonymous stuntman who became a celebrated star. He was the tough-as-nails cowboy with a gentle, expressive soul. He was the man who received Hollywood's highest honor while enduring its deepest private pain. His journey reminds us that a life's value isn't measured in headlines or awards, but in quiet integrity and the courage to face an unforgiving world on your own terms. He left behind a small but perfect body of work that continues to move and inspire, and a life story that serves as a poignant, powerful, and enduring lesson in what it truly means to be strong. In the end, the story of Richard Farnsworth is not simply about a stuntman who became an actor or an Oscar nominee who met a tragic end. It's a story about the weight of a life and the private courage it takes to carry it. For 40 years, he was a ghost on screen, a man paid to be invisible. He took the falls, crashed the cars, and rode the horses for the stars, all without a whisper of recognition. His was a life of quiet competence, of doing the job and going home, of finding satisfaction in the craft itself, not the applause. When fame finally found him, it was by accident, a consequence of an authenticity he couldn't hide. The weathered face and gentle eyes that captivated audiences in his final years were not a performance. They were the map of a life lived with honor and hardship. Perhaps the most poignant